This show is a production of the Best in Tabletop Network. Be your best in every aspect of your game. Find us wherever you find your podcasts, or check us out on YouTube for more Bat Reps podcasts and shows. If you like what we're doing, you can join our Discord through the Best in Tabletop Patreon group, or our YouTube members only area where you'll get access to our entire library of content. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to Best in Faction,
the next generation.
A podcast where when we get our asses kicked, we bring them on the show. Lukas, you have to, for alternating, you have to say your name first.
I'm Lukas.
And I'm Tyler. And we are back, boys. Man, that introduction was smooth as hell. Welcome back to Best in Faction, the next generation. We are bringing you a special report today. No Naj today, as he is at Las Vegas Teams. Tune in next week to hear all about that awesome tournament. But today we are bringing you a special report on one of the factions that I think was getting pretty slept on for a while, but has turned out to be in a really hot spot. You may remember on our last episode detailing Harbor Heresy, though we went undefeated day one, with despite 3 of 4 undefeateds being TNG players, none of us were able to pull out that tournament because we got wrecking balled by a man by the name of Zak Nelson. His name isn't Zachariah, it's just Zachary. But Zach went ahead and won that tournament, and then the next week went to another GT and won that one as well, and we figured that is too much prominence to not be on a podcast talking about the creations of Bile. So today we are joined by the one and only Zak Nelson. How are you doing today, Zach?
What up, man? I'm doing good. A little early for me, but I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that it is currently 7:15 Pacific time on September 24th, that Saturday. If the balanced data slate has dropped and you are listening to this episode and wondering why we're not talking about it, it's not out yet. Whenever it comes out, we'll talk about it. Don't worry, there's going to be plenty of coverage. But we're not here to talk about that today. And hopefully the balanced data slate does something to Bile, and this episode will feel silly once it's out. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, how are you doing today, Lukas? I say as he takes a sip of his tea. Apologies.
I'm good, man. I got my tea, so I'm ready to go. I'm ready to conquer the world 7 a.m. I'm kidding. I'm going back to bed after this. But yeah, I'm doing well. Last week was not super busy, so I did manage to get a couple games in. Managed to defeat Demons 2 nights ago, which felt really good. That, unfortunately, I've deduced is just a go first matchup in the majority of cases. Whether or not I get a free shooting phase into them versus whether or not they start the game 8 inches away from me. It's a huge difference. But it felt good to conquer them after going second a couple times and getting shellacked. And then I also managed to defeat Tyler and I got our first couple games in. So we got like 1.5 games in, and I took one of those, which felt good. So got a couple games in this last week. Had a lot of fun. And eager to talk about Chaos Space Marines. They're definitely one of my favorite factions. One that I'd never play, but I definitely love hearing about their exploits and successes because they are really cool.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, no, we had a couple of good games. I'm excited to get some more in the coming weeks. Yep. But yeah, especially getting ready for Olympia and SoCal. We'll also, so like I said, we'll have more Votan and coverage coming up at some point soon, especially once Nick starts rocking and rolling with those at events. But that codex is also not tournament legal as of just yet. So if you're wondering how Zach does into Votan, maybe we'll ask him about it later. So let's dive right on in. Zach, you are playing Creations of Bile. It's a form of Chaos Space Marines. But let's rewind a little bit, take it a couple steps back. What were you playing before you got into the CSM space? Where was your headspace at? What have you been doing this season? What's been the Nelson MO going into this list writing experience?
Well, other Chaos Space Marines. So I've been playing a lot of Thousand Suns.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
In fact, I've
And
played Thousand
what?
Suns nearly
Mhm.
exclusively, or mostly just Thousand Suns since the book came out. I won one GT with them in October of last year. And other than that, it's been a struggle bus of trying to make Chaos work.
Mhm. Very nice. Yeah, well, I know we played a game, and I played a game into Thousand Suns at Seattle, and Thousand Suns feel like
Oh,
they felt like they missed the train a little bit in the last couple months, as they've been slowly outpaced. What are your thoughts on the current state of Thousand Suns? If someone out there is trying to play them right now, do you think there's still a little bit of juice left in there?
I do. I do. Brad Townsend went undefeated a while back at a
Hmm.
pretty big event, and I think a few weeks ago someone was a co-winner, like second place, 5-0, of
Hmm.
Thousand Suns. I think if you're gonna do Thousand Suns right now, what has been winning requires like a lot of units of rubrics, like 25 or 30.
Hmm.
There may be a list that uses a demons attachment. That would be really cool. So if you're a Thousand Suns faithful and that's your thing, I think you're actually in an okay spot. Just be aware, like Thousand Suns are really high skill cap, and if you want to perform at a high level, it's really on you. Like the army has the tools to do it as long as you get a little help with matchups.
Good stuff. So, what were you like? What though? You obviously moved away from Thousand Suns and into the Chaos Space Marines. What sort of weaknesses were you trying to patch up in the gameplay? That what tools was Thousand Suns not giving you that you needed to go find elsewhere?
Yeah, so Thousand Suns are vulnerable to the Unga Bunga. So their Thousand Suns have decent output and it works in all three phases, but it's not overwhelming in any one phase. And if someone just runs, say, Tyrannifexes and Carnifexes at you, they can literally just run you over. Tyranid Warriors also. Um,
Hmm.
so that's not fun. That's not fun for me personally because I feel like I'll step to the table with another player who is much less experienced than I am, and they will just push their models directly towards me as quickly as possible. And I'm like, well, I guess I lose then. And that feels really bad. That's like mega bad for me. So I was trying to avoid that basically.
For sure. Gotcha. We've definitely talked a lot on the show about how vulnerable so much of the game is to getting rushed. And Thousand Sons, I would totally agree. I don't know about you, Lucas, but like that always seems like the situation they end up poorly in.
That is the quintessential weakness. I feel like whenever I kind of reevaluate where I think Thousand Suns are mentally, and this isn't worth any data, just like kind of conceptually how they match up into the meta. I always am encouraged until I run into pressure or melee matchups where they can
Yep.
get rushed down, and that always just feels bad because, like Zach was saying, they have a damage cap, and once you hit that cap, they're doing nothing else for the turn. And if your opponent puts more than that amount of stuff in your face, then you're kind of shit out of luck.
Orcs have historically been one of those hard matchups too.
Yep.
I'm very curious to see how the demons end up shaking that up a little bit, as having the most efficient shooting unit in the game will kind of shore up some of your weakness to people putting too much crap in your face. So we'll see if 18 flamers is enough to make Thousand Suns viable again. But we're not here to talk about Thousand Suns. We're here to talk about where you went from there,
Yeah.
which is the creations of Bile. So when the new CSM book comes out, people are very hyped about a lot of things. Iron Warriors seem very good. Emperor's Children seem very good. Word Bearers seem very good. I didn't hear a ton of talk about Bile on the front end. Did you experiment with some of those other factions before jumping into the Spiders, or were they like right off the hop, smacking you upside the head of this is the thing to play?
No. So there's a whole story with how I ended up on Bile. And the first step of that is at Charity Hammer. So it's Charity Hammer. We all get our crappy PDF copy of the codex, and Vanilla puts together this EC list that looks pretty good. So I'm a big believer in if you have a player who's better than you who can do the list writing step, then don't screw with it. Just start with whatever they're playing. So I played that Vanilla's EC list into like 37 warriors at Charity Hammer on stream, and I tabled it. So I was like, cool, this looks like it's going to do the Unga Bunga test that I wanted. It's not going to get run over. Um, and so I started with that, and I played a few games at Charity Hammer with it. I played a couple practice games with some buddies afterwards, and then like on my fifth rep, I played it into Death Guard allied with 3 Baby Knights, and it went really, really bad. Uh, so CSM as a book, especially EC, has a problem with Death Guard. Most stuff in the book is strength 5, damage 1 or 2. That feels real bad into things that are all T5. Death Guard's all -1 damage. You're only, like, the CSM book doesn't have flat 3 damage. It's 1 and 2, and that's it. So, like, that's a problem. Your profiles are bad. And Death Guard has the best fight control in the game, basically, because the Blight Spawn not only says you didn't charge, but you can't use any rules that make you fight first. It's actually the Stench Vats are like a weird one-off thing that really make a problem for anything CSM, because CSM don't shoot, they don't really psychic, all they do is punch. That's it. So if you're playing an opponent who can fight control where your profiles are bad, like, well, what's your secondary game then? What are you going to do? It's just bad. So I played that match one time with EC, and I was like, there is no saving this. So I was like, what plays differently? Word Bearers. So Word Bearers have a really good secondary. You can just stand in the middle of the table and get 15 points. You pair that with Warp Ritual, and you're standing there to get 15 and 12 points. And then you just have a squad of Illusory Supplicator Terminators in the middle of the board, some characters, and your thing is, I'm going to stand here and win. And that's cool. It has... That Word Bearers design doesn't have Abaddon in it, right? So it has a lot more stuff, but it doesn't have that, like, big beat stick character potential. And if you end up having to run so say you end up in a matchup where you don't win the staring match for whatever reason, could be against Necrons or Sisters on certain boards, and you have to go, that Word Bearers list is actually in a much weaker place than the EC list is. Because it doesn't have all those big beat stick characters. It can't be like, here are the Terminators, and then here's the characters, and you lost, because it has all these other pieces to do other stuff. And it was good, but again, it had Death Guard problems. I played like 9 practice reps with it, and I played into Death Guard 4 or 5 of those 9 games, and I won the first 4 and lost the 5th one, and I was like, the 5th one was against the best Death Guard player I had played, and I was like, man, this is still just bad. It's unsalvageable. Word Bearers isn't quite as unsalvageably bad as EC is, but it's bad. So I was like, I didn't say something. I actually went back to playing Thousand Suns. I said, fuck this, and threw up my hands. And I was kind of playing Thousand Suns, and Colin was like, sometime after me doing this, is like, Zach, if you want to win, you should just play Bile. And for whatever reason, I didn't immediately just go play Bile. I was like, yeah. And then I hung out with him next week, and I was like, Zach, if you want to win, you should just play Bile. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. And the thing is, for some reason, in my head was building up Bile as this other thing that's not the same as what I had been doing. But it's the exact same pieces. It's like the exact same models arranged a little different with slightly different rules. So it's something I'm already super experienced with. I came to it knowing how to use all those pieces. The differences are, if you play into Death Guard, you actually win them on 3s because you're +1 strength. And you can just throw some stupid shit into that Blight Spawn, and okay, kill me, he's going with me. And problem solved. So, like, it just it makes the Death Guard match doable, and also it makes you, like, amazing. Like, why have some fights last based on where a couple of your characters are when you can just fight with everything? It's like, it's gross. So after I took Creations of Bile at Harbor Heresy to try and figure out if I was going to hate it or not, and to figure out if I would bring it to Harvester. Of course, I won Harbor Heresy, and I was like, this is great. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Very cool. So we're talking about a little bit of strength, a little bit of combat shenanigans. Could you walk us through real quick what the actual rules for Creations of Bile are for the uninitiated?
Yeah, so it's got a 2-part Legion trait. The first part is +1 strength and +1 inch of movement. And the second part is fights on death. And it's everything fights on death all the time. Anything that has the Legion keyword Bile is fight on death, which is just nuts.
Yeah, that's a lot. And we're talking your entire army, every single unit, other than like cultists and stuff, but everything that punches, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, no stratagems, no being within certain distances of anything. It just happens, and it just works. And that is a powerful chapter tactic.
I have spent a CP to make Abaddon Bile for the turn.
I'm sure you have. That is incredibly annoying. Awesome. So let's go ahead and break down where your list is at right now, and then we'll start talking about how it works and what it's good at. So,
you made Lukas, this so easy to read.
Yeah, exactly. Lukas, you want to run us through this list, and then Zach, you'll give us some comments on bits that we haven't mentioned just yet.
Sure. So yeah, this is Zach's Creations of Bile list. Of note is I believe this is the list from Harvester, not from Harbor Heresy. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So leading the battalion of Bile, we have a Demon Prince. I'm guessing this is the guy with Galax the Decayed and some warlord trait to make him better at punching. We've got a Dark Apostle. We got a Master of Possession, or a Possession, I should say. We got 2x10 cultists, 5 legionaries. I'm guessing they're Slanesh to put the Feel No Pain on the Terminators and such.
Correct again.
Master of Executions with some punching warlord traits, 3x5 possessed, 8 warp talons, and Abaddon himself, the Dawn.
That's
Very cool.
You got all those things correct.
Yeah. I did.
And I think you mentioned them but didn't list them off. There is a full brick of 10 Terminators in there.
Oh yeah. Otherwise, it would be a little bit without chonk. Yeah, there's 10 Terminators in there. It does kind of seem like the Terminators plus Abaddon are the quote unquote core of the list. Like if you had to put it down to like a central facet, it does kind of seem like that ball moving around together is one entity. How often do you not do that? How often do Abaddon and the Terminators not stick together on the table?
It's a cold day in hell. They're always together. Sometimes they deploy from the center of the table separately. So Abaddon will go to one thing, the Terminators will go to one thing or whatever, and they're not always together, but they, as it happens, they always just move up together in a ball, basically.
Yeah.
Awesome. So could we talk about some of the big synergies that are happening here? Because until you start applying some of the buffs and the psychic powers and the whatever you call the chants, this doesn't seem like that much on paper, but there's a lot more to, especially to the Terminators. Could you walk us through what some of the buffs and the spells are that these guys are rocking and how they're going to synergize together?
For sure. So the most important buff in the CSM book is Illusory Supplication. It's a prayer, so it comes off your Dark Apostle, and only works on core units, and it makes it so they cannot be hit on better than a 4, so transhuman to hit, or some people call it transhitman for short, and no rerolls. So probably the single best buff in all of 40k, I think. And so that makes the Terminators, like, it imposes a hard 50% checkpoint in efficiency on things shooting the Terminators. And with the kind of guns that are good at killing Terminators, that's a huge deal because they don't roll a lot of dice. And then the other buff those Terminators have, they have the Black Rune of Damnation, so they're -1 to wound. And their Mark of Slanesh, so those Slanesh legionaries can cast Delightful Agonies on them for a 5-up Feel No Pain. So in total, they're never hit on better than a 4, no rerolls to hit, -1 to wound, and then a 5-up Feel No Pain. Which makes them nearly impossible to kill. I have never had them be killed in one turn by anything.
Dang, that's a lot of meat right there. And to be clear here, the relic for -1 to wound on the Sergeant, this doesn't work the way the Black Templars ones work that a lot of people may be more familiar with, where like the Sergeant's super buff, but once you kill through him, you can start just whacking boys down. That's a unit-wide thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just -1 to wound. And because the Master of Possession, they'll often be T5. I'm sorry, Possession.
Incredibly annoying. And then and the Master of Possession himself is also able to heal guys, as I understand it.
He has Heal a Model, Res a Model built in. In fact, one of the things I am looking at now is, like, I'm trying to think of what a Black Legion list might look like. And in that list, the Master of Possession can heal Abaddon.
Spicy.
It's kind of rude.
Awesome. All right. So what is the general game plan here? You don't have a single gun, as far as I can tell.
The Terminators have 32 Bolter shots and 8 autocannon shots, which is more than you'd think because it has 4 rolls to hit and exploding 6s for most of the time you're using it. But
sure.
Yeah, it's not going to do any real lifting.
You're not planning to kill stuff with guns. That's not plan A here.
Unless you're playing as elves.
Sure, absolutely. So what's the general game plan here? We're talking about Abaddon and the Terminators are probably going to live together. What are they trying to do? Who's going where? Yeah. What's the 101 if someone wanted to pick this up? What would you tell them about how to play it?
So I would say the first thing you do is the same thing you do with any army, which is ask what are your secondaries. So with Creations of Bile, one of the things that makes them such a strong sub-faction is they have a good secondary. It's kill a monster or character and get 3 points, Kill anything else except a vehicle, get 2 points, and that's for the battle round, and it stacks. So you'll get 2 most turns, and there'll be a couple turns where you get a 5. So if you take that, and it's in the same category as Assassinate and Bring It Down. It's in Purge the Enemy. That means you can combine it with no prisoners. So in games where you can no prisoners and specimens for the spider together, that's really that reads like get 25 points on these 2 secondaries. And then you just take banners, because if you're running them over, they're not over here, and you get 10 or 12 or 13 points on that. And you have a secondary game that works against most matchups, and all you have to do is do what you wanted to do anyways. So what you want to do anyways, as you can tell from all the punching, is run people over. The Terminators with the buffs kind of function as a character delivery system. Like the Prince is really punchy, Abaddon's really punchy, the Master of Execution's also punchy. And so the Terminators move up the table with them behind them. And you might lose most of or all of the Terminators in getting there, but by the time all the Terminators are dead, you have charged with your characters, and you're eating their army and their DZ, and the game's over. And then the Possessed and the Warp Talons are there to skirmish, right? So if you have this big ball applying pressure in the middle, how are you playing for the corners, for objectives or whatever, what are you using as trade pieces? That's the Possessed and the Warp Talons. Anyone who plays armies that want to run other people over can tell you that just because you want to run them over doesn't mean moving your models at them as fast as you can is actually the right thing to do. That's often the wrong thing to do. So like in my game against Tyler at Harbor Heresy, like I failed Supplication once or twice, and I wanted to be patient and wait and not just go, because I knew that if I went, there was a non-zero chance I'd lose too many models and I lose the game. But if I pace it right, so I don't run out of stuff till right at the end, I never get run over, and that's a way to win. So basically, take secondaries to let you run your opponent over, and then just know when it's not quite the time to go yet.
One thing that's so strong about that Specimens the Spider secondary, and you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but like you said, it's in the same category as Assassinate and Bring It Down. Is that right?
Correct.
So if you're facing up against something without any vehicles, you take Specimens and you get like between a 12 and a 15. And if you face off against a lot of vehicles, you take Bring It Down and you get somewhere between a 12 and a 15.
Yep.
So you've got that kill secondary category. And again, the whole point of your list is to pressure and kill stuff. So taking a kill secondary where you're guaranteed at least 12 points, regardless of what you're facing against in that one category, seems really, really good. And like you said, obviously you can pair Specimens with no prisoners. So anyone who gives up no prisoners is just playing at a 25-point deficit against you, which not amazing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly correct. What's actually hard is like the list doesn't have a ton of recourse in terms of secondaries. So if you can't prisoners, say you're playing against Chaos Knights, which I played at Harvester, where you have Bring It Down and that's it. You get no other help beyond that. So that is hard. Like in that situation, I'm taking Bring It Down banners, and I think I took Warp Ritual, and I made it work. But that is hard. One of the things, if you look at the full version of this list, you'll notice the Master of Possession has a relic that gives him +1 to cast, and 9's pluses to cast are undeniable. That is in there in case I end up in a bad matchup where I'm basically forced to take a Psychic secondary, and it lets me do Psychic secondaries uphill into Psychic defense, and it's not great. It's the difference between getting 3 points on Interrogate and 6 or 9. Or getting 2 or 3 rituals instead of may only be able to get 1. It makes it an option. In fact, against Tyler, I took Psychic Interrogation and I got 6 on it, and one of those was because I rolled a 9. And so like it's just there to like as a worst case scenario, like give you a backup plan. And it works in that. I think in another evolution of this list, I would actually really like to have a Venom Crawler. So that he can be +2 to cast, and then there's a wider range of scenarios where you could take Psychic secondaries.
Very cool. Yeah, so let's kind of move into that sort of space there. We got an idea of how the list is going to work. Can you talk about some of the more recent additions, the latest tech pieces, what some of the specific choices are here that may be a little bit less obvious than Terminators, Abaddon, etc. That what do you got going on here that's more interesting and more recent to your list? What's been working, what hasn't?
For sure. So if we say that the Terminators and Abaddon is like a character delivery system, right? What you're delivering matters a lot. And you'll see my first list at Harbor Heresy had a Disco Lord in it, and that was replaced with a Demon Prince. The Disco Lord on rights just hits harder than the Demon Prince does. But the thing is, he's on an aircraft base and he doesn't fly. So like terrain is your worst enemy. In our game, Tyler, terrain was a problem for me. And against Nick in the finals, I actually hung the piece entirely because of positioning and movement. It was just bad. So I decided that, he may do more damage, but if he doesn't hit the thing you need to hit, he's actually doing no damage at all. So it would be better to have something that flies. So I brought in the Wingy Prince. It also so happens the Prince's sword, Galax, ignores damage caps. And one of the hypothetical problems here was if all you have is some bolters and melee, things that you need to 3-phase are going to be a problem. So the sword kind of solves that problem, and it's on a flying model, so it doesn't have to go around terrain, doesn't get screwed by player placed terrain. And I think he's just a better piece than the Disco Lord on retrospect. I also use a Master of Executions. So like you have an HQ slot. You run an HQ slots, right? Because you need a Demon Prince, a Dark Apostle, and a Master of Possession. So I wanted another character, so I went with the Master of Executions. I used to run them in Word Bearers, and as Word Bearers, they come with Chapter Master built in because they're Word Bearers. And that's what takes them from like good to great. So in this list, he has the Relic to give himself 4 rerolls to hit, so that he can just be like, here, 4 mortals plus whatever else. And then there's Abaddon. Who's Abaddon?
Makes a lot of sense. Are there you talked about the Venom Crawler? Is there anything else that's like just outside the list right now that hasn't quite made the cut, but that you'd be interested in trying out or think might almost be good enough but just isn't there yet?
So Chuck in his list runs a squad of 5 Corn bikes with the Relic Mace. I think that's great. I really love that. He has 5 less possessed than me, so that's other way to build this that I think is also really good. In my Word Bearers list, I had Venom Crawlers and a Vindicator. I don't know how you would find the points for that in this list, but I really wish it had a little more shooting. Like the bolters are good against some things, but if it just had a little bit more varied types of shooting, I feel like I could constrain the way my opponents play a little more, force them to respect me. And again, I'm thinking about doing something with Black Legion, and in the Black Legion concept, I'm trying to incorporate that, but we'll see how that goes.
For sure. I know that I've run into this issue a lot of times for not having guns, where my opponent, because they don't have any guns at all, they don't really have to respect that with positioning, and they get a lot of free movement out of just getting to be where they want to be instead of be where they want to be and be behind some amount of terrain. Do you find that to be an issue here in jockeying for positioning, or does the fight on death just hard counter melee armies to the point that it doesn't really matter?
The answer to that is yes. It's a huge problem. The term, like, as long as your opponent like has things that aren't afraid of the Terminators, no Ren shooting or Ren 1 shooting, and they can just do whatever they want, that's awful. It's not a huge deal. And like you said, the fact that we fight on death means it's a little more okay, because you can just stick possessed wherever, and if they get to go in the open and charge you, whatever, you still fight, right? Like, it does help, but it's I still wish there was more shooting here. Like just a little bit, like, again, 1 demo cannon. I believe Lukas in a game with Word Bearers neglected to respect the single demo cannon, and it proceeded to blow up a battle wagon.
Oh, okay. I mean, that was fair. It did do that.
But yeah, and that's not because it's regularly going to do that, but it can. Right?
It was pissed off, dude.
Yeah, you didn't respect it. It was.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, this will get like 4 shots. Okay, somehow we ended up at like 8 hits with the explosions. Okay, weird.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so with that in mind as a potential weakness to be trying to exploit here, let's say we're trying to play into Bile, as the entire Pacific Northwest is right now, and evidently failing. What are the things that you're concerned about, either matchups wise or positioning wise? Like, what are you trying to mitigate here that you think might be a problem? Obviously, it hasn't been a problem just yet, but like, what in theory should people be looking for if they want to be ready to play into this kind of nonsense?
Bro, Bile is allergic to guns. Like, straight up. Like, any and all guns. The meta around here is a lot of punching and some shooting. I managed to, through my 2 events, I only played into 1 army that was going to shoot a lot, and that was Chaos Knights, and I managed to get a win. Other than that, I didn't have to play anybody that wants to shoot. My nightmare, the new Tau lists are so Creations of Bile. We don't like -1 damage. We don't like everything. Everything's T7 or T8. We don't like toughness skew, and we don't like guns. Right? If you put -1 damage, toughness skew, and guns together, you get Chaos Knights, and that's terrible for Bile. We want nothing to do with it. Tau, where you're running like 2 or 3 Riptides and Planes, and Commanders, like, well, I don't want anything to do with that, even a little. That's terrible for me. So guns are bad. Tau and the modern Tau that's high toughness skew, and Chaos Knights are 2 really good examples. Imperial Hanks, Suns Out, Guns Out. Knights would be awful for this. And I mean, you play that match by using terrain and constraining what can shoot the Terminators a bit, and getting your characters up the field, and then charging your characters into everything. But man, it's rough because you lose everything else, and pretty soon it's like just Abaddon and a Demon Prince running around bonking knights, and it's real. It's tenuous at best.
For sure. So it seems like, in the words of some very highly educated meta analyzers, that Bile right now is in such a good spot because it really is just a hammer in a meta full of nails. There's a lot of stuff that plays into it very well. People just aren't taking that right now.
Yeah, I think that this. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I think Bile doesn't actually need a nerf. I think that the meta will change and Bile will just stop being good. I think Votan's going to come out and they're going to shoot a lot. I don't know if the answer to Votan is going to be to try and outshoot them or try and punch them, but I think it's just going to change the meta a lot, and that Bile will end up running into those bad games often enough that it's hard to get a full 5-0 out of it.
I think everyone is going to have trouble with that once Votan comes out.
It is probably the most polarizing, the most polarizing archetype that I can think of in recent memory, because it is so. I use the term auto win. Like, when I say auto win, I don't mean like this is a matchup where I can expect to have like a 100% win rate going in, but like you are very favored into melee matchups and you are very disfavored into shooting matchups, regardless of basically what it is. Just show up to the table. If your opponent has enough gun, okay, this is looking pretty scary. If your opponent doesn't have any gun, okay, well, I'll absolutely Thunderdome them. And like you said, I also am of the belief that Bile doesn't need a nerf because of this. I mean, yeah, is it unfun for melee armies to play into Fight on Death? Yeah, so maybe we could like make the Fight on Death less reliable or something like that. Like make it on a 3-up or a 4-up or something. But yeah, it is just so... It is so polarizing to see Bile across the table from you and either feel supremely confident or completely hopeless.
So at Harvester in the semifinals, my buddy Donald was playing Tau against Vince's Corn Demons that I ended up playing in the finals. And when I saw that, I was like, if Tau wins this and I play Tau in the finals, I probably just lose. And then when I saw that Corn Demons had won it, like you said, against melee armies, I'm so confident. I was like, okay. I never like to dismiss anything out of hand, right? But I was like, I don't think there's any way here. Like,
yeah. Go ahead, Tyler.
How does this army feel about mortal wounds? That seems like another potential thing that you're going to run into. You don't have that much wounds to chew through at the end of the day.
Yeah, I played Thousand Suns twice at Harvester. The first time was the guy it was a really nice guy with a beautiful army, but it wasn't like optimized for competitive. The second one I played against was much better. And with Thousand Suns, like. So the tools you have Terminators, the 5-up Feel No Pain, which is some defense, and you have Abaddon that phase locks at 3 wounds. So those are the 2 things you have if you just have to take it, right? So that means your first real option there is just to not take it, right? Like use terrain, hide yourself, like use terrain and positioning so that you're picking what your opponent is hitting, right? You have to give them something, but control it, right? Like. And Thousand Suns don't like being in combat at all, not with Possessed. Like, possessed are great. Only thing in this list that isn't great in 1,000 Suns is the Warp Talons. Everything else is fantastic in 1,000 Suns. So just, you move up behind walls, you're fast. You're faster than they are. Set terrain, like, I got to, against the second 1,000 Suns matchup, I won the roll to place terrain, and there were these pieces of terrain that were like an 8-inch long, 3/4 inch thick wall. Just like a long, skinny wall, and I won the roll to go first, and I just put that right in the middle of the table. Like, it was a 5-objective mission with one in the center, and I put it against the objective in the middle of the table and directly in the path I was going to use to move towards him.
Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's go ahead and break into some of these games. You've won 2 tournaments. You want to talk about maybe a matchup or two that went particularly well and a matchup or two that went particularly poorly to try and pick some stuff up from?
For sure. So I'm actually going to start with one that's like a through line from the whole Disco Lord Demon Prince. So in the finals, I'm playing Corn Demons. And I fight on death, which is good, but like he had Scarbrand, a Phase Gate Bloodthirster, and a Be'lakor. Those things are still a problem. You can't just let those things run around bonking you and expect it to go well. So when I was looking at this, the thing is, those models all have big bases, and they fly, except for Scarbrand, when they move, but they can't fly over buildings in the charge step, right? So the first thing I did was I put all 3 of my big ruins entirely in front of my D. So out of my DZ, in the middle of the table where the game's going to be played, and just with their back up to the side of the objective so I can get a kind of gated unit up there to not be shot. He had some shooting. And so essentially I spent, because GW took out the 2-inch coherency, right? These things can't breach, so they don't qualify for the frontline hotfix.
To be clear, you mean 2-inch engagement range?
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Coherency.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. 2-inch engagement range, correct. And so this event, like I'm assuming most, used Frontline's old rule that you can, hit the wall, but that only works if you breach, and these models don't breach. So I spent a lot of this game, like moving my Terminators up like 1.1 inches from a wall, but they have windows, so I can shoot him. I chipped Scarbrand down to like 11 wounds because he didn't want to commit. He didn't want to commit first and hit my whole army. So I played for position a lot, and I just I forced him to have to go around buildings in really awful ways. And the upshot of me using the buildings to get in his way and move block was, after move blocking him for a turn, he had to end up charging a Bloodthirster and Be'lakor into a squad of 10 cultists. Because I had positioned them so there was no way to land his base on the far side. So he would have been, he couldn't even, it would have been like a 11 on the dice to get across them to my other models. And so it forced him to charge into a bad position, then I just got to eat him because he was in a bad spot. And again, it was all because of just using terrain. And I mean, I had to sack some possessed and other stuff to force the geometries I wanted. But essentially, I beat him using terrain, not even my models. By the time I ended up hitting my models, I had thoroughly dictated where his models were going to be and when. And again, it was just big base, can't find the charge step. That's too bad. And I think the takeaway from that is have infantry as the best keyword in the game still. Right. So that was fun.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're talking about how infantry keyword is especially strong in a world where we're playing under that house rule of not being able to charge block through a different realm. If you roll up to a GW event where charge blocking is just fully allowed, do you think that becomes a bit of an issue for your army to deal with if people are behind the right kind of walls?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, this army only punches. So, I mean, depending on how silly the terrain is, like if it's GW's orc things that are essentially fully enclosed buildings, that's mega dumb. If it's typical ruins that are only an L or a partial, right? The Warp Talons and the Possessed are really fast, so I could probably get around some of that. But yeah, it certainly is going to suffer if there's full-on cheesy, no chargy.
For sure. We're all kind of talking right now, kind of curious to see how FLG is going to handle things with the changes they're talking about making to their terrain. If they're going to be implementing that rule, and if not, especially with potentially a lot more line of sight blocking moving into their terrain sets, we'll see how that ends up shaking out.
I've got a question, Tyler.
Go for it.
I'm curious about the Warp Talons. I feel like most folks have either played about or heard about CSM, and it's not one of the units that gets regularly talked about. Can you talk about what makes the Warp Talons strong and how you use them in your games? Because they're not often a thing I see in CSM lists.
For sure. I was running them in Word Bears because so Warp Talons in this list have 13-inch movement, strength 5, AP 2, 5 attacks apiece, and they reroll all wounds. It's essentially a through and model with 2 lightning claws. They just put all the rules in one data sheet without the special names.
Oh no, we might have lost Zach.
Oh.
Nope, I can hear Zach just fine. I think we're losing you, Lucas. Go ahead and continue, Zach.
Yep. Lost Lucas. Okay. So the Warp Talons in total have 41 attacks at 8 models, and their strength 5, 4 rerolls to wound, 2 rend. So they will absolutely clear things where your possessed attacks are like feel like they're too high quality at 2 damage. So they kill bullshit really well. And in fact, because the bump to strength 5 in Bile, they're actually useful into knights. They're pretty much, because they have 4 rerolls to wound, they are useful into everything. Against Chaos Knights, he got charged by a big knight, and there were like 5 left in the squadron. He didn't think took like 8 wounds. It was great.
Yep. I've always thought of them basically equivalent to Vanguard veterans. They're basically Vanguard veterans with a built-in 5-up invuln and double lightning claw is basically
that is literally what they are. Yeah. Yep. And in Bile they get an extra inch of movement, so they go 13 inches.
Yep.
They're really in here so that I can use them to do like first turn plays if someone moves something forward, or like if I can't quite get terrain the way I want it to reach from wherever onto an objective, they're my piece that has the extra movement to make it that charge.
Yep. Nice.
And in 2 or 3 different tournament games, I tried to make a turn 1 trade play with them and like failed the 7 with the reroll. Like it happened 3 times. Just lost them on the top of turn 2 because they hung. It was great.
Bummer. Yeah.
Very cool. You want to break us down another game that you think might have a good story in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chuck and this is something I should touch on when we're talking about Bile. This list was written with my teammate Chuck. Chuck and I paired into each other in the second round of both tournaments. And if you ever want to play a really silly game of 40k, play Bile versus Bile. Because every combat, everything fights on death. It doesn't matter who goes first. Like, nothing matters. You're all going to fight every fight phase. It's really silly. And what I think was most interesting about that matchup, the key takeaway, is if you're playing 2 combat armies and the person who commits first generally loses, that means that going second wins. And in both matches, I went second. My Chuck rolled well for a turn, had to go first, and I ended up winning. And I think that's going to be how almost any game where you have 2 melee-only armies is, because whoever has to put their stuff somewhere first is going to lose. As far as interesting games go, at Harvester, my 3rd round on the first day, I played against a guy named Jaden Iwasa. I think that's how I pronounce his last name. Apparently, used to be a world-ranked War Machine and Hordes player, and had come over to 40k and was playing a beautiful Chaos Knights army. I think he took best paint at the event, and he had like this. It's beautifully painted, and he didn't like the armature models, so all of his war dogs were modeled like they're on all 4s, like actual dogs. It was a really cool army.
Yeah, he does great stuff. I played him round 1 at Seattle, and I think he won best painted at Seattle as well. Dude is very good with a brush.
Yeah, and he's also a great human being. He was really cool to play with. So I rolled up to that game, and I'm like, all right, I knew this was going to happen to me. This is like worst case scenario. I can't take specimens and prisoners. I have to bring it down. It's a board that's going to really spread everything out. His army's all fast. He was running 2 big knights and 8 little knights. He had a big Psyker knight to give himself a 5-up feel no pain, and his other knight had the activatable 5-up feel no pain. So 2 tough big knights, and he was playing House Herpatrix or whatever for the 4 extra wounds. I didn't realize, like, I play Imperial Knights. I had no idea that the Chaos Knight ones got 4 extra wounds. The combination of 4 extra wounds and a 5-up feel no pain is grody. That's like over the top cool. So his list had a lot of shooting. All of his knights had guns. And I think most of the armigers, but not all, had a melee weapon as well. I think they were all claws, I think, for the D3 plus 3 damage, I think. So I knew going into this it was going to be hard because he shoots a lot. I don't shoot at all in ways that actually meaningfully hurt him. And if he was smart, he was going to keep his terrain at the back of the table, right, and like just play in the open and make me run at him, which is exactly what he did. So I did get to place the first piece of terrain. Okay, take a step back. Secondaries. I took banners. I took Warp Ritual, and I took Bring It Down. He had some psychic defense, so I wasn't super confident about Warp Ritual. But I had won the roll for deployment, and I had put a piece of terrain right in the middle of the table. So there was a 6-inch, put a character here. And so I was like, all right, this is going to work. And I put a wall up to try and be able to project threat on his 2 objectives on the side. We're playing Data Scry Salvage, so it's, basically people playing 2 corners. And I set the terrain up so that I had pretty good cover the long way on the table, right? So if he wants to shoot me the long way, I can hide pretty well. But to do that, I gave up lanes going the short way. But if he's putting many models in those short lanes to shoot me, I can charge him. So I set that up. I ended up going first. I put banners up on 3 objectives. Possessed move 10 inches and can put up banners. Sometimes it's the best thing they do for you, right? So I put up 3 banners. I set up to do Warp Ritual, and he proceeds to promptly just outroll me and deny it. Fine. So on the first turn, I fail Supplication. And I'm like, this is bad. So no Illusory Supplication. You can hit me on 3s and reroll, right? I only end up losing 2 Terminators, so not that bad. And I move forward to get in position to try and project threat onto him. And in my next turn, Supplication works, the Feel No Pain works, and I've set it up so I can move out Resi Terminator and charge one of his big knights on the short direction. Basically, everything goes wrong. I haven't cast my Feel No Pain yet, and the Master of Possession perils on casting Heal a Model, Res a Model, so I can't Res a Model to get a shorter charge. So I don't CP roll that. I then roll the Feel No Pain and fail it and decide at that point that I probably have to not go. So I had 2 CP at the beginning of the turn. I need 1 CP to make the Terminators advance and charge, and I'm budgeting 1 CP to reroll a charge, because on this turn I was going to be attempting 3 or 4. And I fail the Heal a Model, Res a Model, so now my charge is way longer. And then I fail the Feel No Pain, and I decide that it's better to CP reroll the Feel No Pain and maybe just have to idle. Some of my Terminators are still in cover, but I felt like it could be an overextend or be real bad. So instead I stand there because I'm thinking he killed 2 Terminators when I had no Supplication. If I have a Supplication and a Feel No Pain, he's going to kill, less than 2 Terminators. Well, so the first thing that happens is I fail all my dread tests. The Warp Talons fail their dread test, and their 5-inch charge becomes a 10-inch charge and fails. The Possessed, who have like an 8-inch charge, fail the dread test, can't do it. Terminators didn't fail the dread test, but it was like a 8 or a 9 and just failed it. So nothing worked. I hung the Warp Talons. It's bad, all bad. But Supplication, I have Supplication. I have a Feel No Pain. I figure he won't just wreck the Terminators. That was wrong. There were 8 Terminators at the beginning of his turn. He kills 4 or 5. I fail morale, and everybody but 1 runs. So going into the top of 3, I've still got 14 possessed, but I have 1 Terminator, and that's bad. So my stuff had all moved forward though, because I had done like the 1 turn in idle. I'm within striking distance right now, so I'm like, all right, everybody's going. And so Abaddon gets advanced in charge. The Prince goes. Everything goes. And I charged onto his 2 objectives, basically, or charged at his side. The Prince went into a Big Knight. The Big Knight had been chipped. He had charged my Warp Talons and killed them, and they'd done like 6 or 8 wounds to it. So my Prince goes into a Big Knight and is like, on 7 attacks, it's turn 3 now, so exploding 6 is like, cool, take 10 at -3 for flat 3, no Feel No Pain. And the Big Knight just evaporates. Abaddon goes into an Armiger, picks it up. And then I chipped up another Armiger. But now I'm positioned across the table, and basically we then proceeded to hit each other back and forth, and I just simplified. I ended up getting all 3 Warp Rituals while I'm doing this. I max Bring It Down. I ended up with like an 8 or 9 on banners and just simplified down to a few pieces, and I was ahead on primary and ahead on secondaries. And so it worked out. And on retrospect, I realized like he made a decision early in the game to back off from the short flank, so I couldn't charge him easily. I think he could have actually gone full pressure, and instead of backing off, put those models in and just committed more that direction and pressured me harder, and that would have stopped me from getting an early lead. And then I think we still cancel each other out, and then I'm just behind. But it was very hard, and that was my nightmare matchup that I was terrified of. So I ended up winning by a narrow margin. It was 7 or 8 points, maybe. And there was a ton of places where it could have just gone the other direction.
How did the Dawn do in this game? I get the feeling, as a Chaos Knights player who's thinking about having to play against CSM, Bile in particular, with Abaddon included, he seems like a big problem because Chaos Knights can do damage and shooting and melee, but that's basically it. So the inability to one-shot Abaddon seems like a major detractor for Chaos Knights. So how did he do in this matchup?
He killed 3 little knights, and he could have killed 4 if I had just had the balls to multi-charge 2 at the end. And he took up like all of his attention for the turn after he was delivered. So in the turn I delivered him, I actually managed to keep him in between 2 squads of like a 5 and a 4 possessed. So he had just lost a bunch of knights, and now he has to deal with 10 possessed before he can get to Abaddon. And that ended up being a problem. He did not actually end up, he ended up like there was a single possess that he wrote and absorbed an activation of shooting more than he should have, so that he couldn't shoot Abaddon in the shooting phase and had to charge him. Unfortunately, the knight that Abaddon went up and killed exploded. And then they're like another knight exploded. Like he proceeded to explode. He exploded 2 things on Abaddon for 5 mortals, which was really unfortunate. Yeah, exactly. He just rolled 2 6s, didn't pay for it either, just rolled it. He ended up killing Abaddon in the end by auto detonating his last night when Abaddon had 2 wounds. So yeah, Abaddon was a huge problem. Like I stuck him in between just enough stuff that he was screened. He went around bonking stuff. Like he bonked something and killed it, and he had to charge him with something in the fight phase, so he couldn't shoot him. He bonked that and killed it. So he was like A1 winner. Without him, I lose the game.
Gotcha.
Makes good sense. You were talking about this this multi-flank thing being interesting on something like Data Scry. How do you feel like you approach various missions here? It seems like when there's a center objective, the mission plan is pretty straightforward. But when we're playing something that doesn't have that, a Data Scry, recover the relics, a Tide of Conviction, what's sort of the game plan if there's not a very obvious middle to dogpile?
For sure. So that's where I think setting up terrain is most important, right? Because what I want is terrain where I can hide my infantry from which I can charge onto an objective, right? So I want to be able to like have somewhere I can hide deployed, have somewhere safe place for them to move, and then they can go, right? That way I can just do the forever missile trade pieces. So as long as my opponent doesn't have the shooting to easily kill, say, 5 possessed, and a lot of things in the meta right now don't, right? If I charge those 5 possessed onto your objective, I get to kill what's on that objective, and then when you charge me, I get to kill you too. So it's like impossible to not get value, especially because the thing that goes to kills us has to be able to kill possessed. So definitionally, it can't be garbage, right? And Tyler, this afternoon, I'm sure you talked about it. Like one of the things that I hadn't thought about before playing Bile is that all your units have like these unit on unit matchups where it'd be a 20% to win, and you never do it because that's terrible for you, right? But if your opponent is happy to take the 80% and you just get to free roll it a bunch of times, every now and then you hit the 20% and your 5 possessed kill something they should never have killed, like say 5 Tyrant Guard. And so like it gives you this opportunity to get stupid efficient plays. So like if there's no center, we're happy to just skirmish, right? I will out skirmish you, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw trade pieces at you and use them efficiently and eat up your shit. And then after you've done this 2 or 3 times, I'm hitting you with the rest of my army. So I just bleed. It's really good because the stuff's fast and it's hard. I can just bleed people and then hit them. And the only thing my opponent could do is aggressively come at me, right? And that's actually often the right answer if they have the right tools to do it.
Interesting. So that's curious as to me. You think that it still is the right play into this flavor of CSM to rush them pretty hard? You think that's more of an issue than if someone wants to sit back and play the trading game?
It depends. If your opponent has to fight, I think that it's wrong. I think so. Like some of the times where I've had guard games is like Sisters, Repentia into the Terminators. Like they can't reroll the hits, but the 6s explode, so sometimes it just goes hot. And I've lost the Terminator, essentially lost the Terminators, basically all of them, but like 1 or 2, right? So like unit of repentance smacking their dick, and then my game is really hard. And if someone has something else that can do an equivalent function, or even if they just say someone has Death Shroud, right, and they can just tar pit us together and sit there forever, if someone can restrict where I go by just tying me up so I can't push downfield, it's real hard because the characters can't outpace the Terminators or they get killed, right? So like if someone can fix my Terminators in place by whatever means, that's really bad. You could theoretically do it with Spore Mines too, with a move block, right? Any way to just control where the Terminators move and their control where I can put my army, can buy someone the time they need to say chip me down with their shooting if they have some, like say Sisters with multi-melt the Rets, or you name it, whatever. So yeah, I think being aggressive, even if the goal isn't to kill my things, but just to constrain my movement, can be a really big deal.
Yeah, what Zach's talking about is something that I've had some thoughts on recently, and it's in pressure matchups or in matchups in general where a lot of melee combat's going to be happening. One of the most important ways to influence the game is thinking about where the fights are going to take place on the board, right? If they take place like between the midfield objectives and your opponent's DZ, that's great for you because that means that they're battling to make their way onto the midfield objectives that you're holding, whereas vice versa, you're battling to make your way onto the midfield objectives if they're happening closer to your DZ. It's super important where the fights are taking place, and if you can like pin parts of the Creations army or any melee army that you're playing against, that they can't fall back and charge, just pinning them in place and making sure that their movement options are restricted next turn is a great way to counter that kind of play.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second, guys.
Tyler, I'm curious, playing against Creations of Bile, what you felt like the most challenging parts of the matchup were. Obviously, your list is very different from most melee / pressure midfield lists, but what scared you the most and what posed the biggest problem over the course of the game?
Yeah, the biggest problem for me is definitely the constant 2-for-1 trading, right? Like my list is built around on the idea that I can get in, I can hit something very hard in melee, and then I can take a full turn of your activations to deal with it because it's a lot of wounds, even if it's something like Raveners, which like don't take that much to kill. Suddenly, if he can sling something in and I have to lose a piece in order to pick it back up, or bigger deal, if I want to sling something at him and he then doesn't have to spend a piece to pick it up, that activation economy gets real messy. And yeah, my inability to pick up spares was also a real problem. At the end of the game, there were a couple objectives. Like Zach had 2 possessed. He's like, this objective is mine. There's nothing you can do about it. And like usually that's not a real for me because I have a drill squad that says, okay, you're funny. I'm going to go walk in and eat that unit now. But I can't do that to 2 possessed. Because 2 possessed have a very real chance of killing 10 T3, T4 1 wound dudes that don't have saves. Like that's not a reliable thing that I can work with anymore. So my ability to flip objectives is a lot messier. The other thing that was highly problematic was Zach's inability to fail a 4-up deny on Abaddon, to hold me to a hard 0-1 warp ritual, even after I vected it. Just 2 CP, doesn't matter. That is something that we haven't talked about yet, Zach, that I would love for you to talk a little bit about. This army has a phenomenal CP economy. Like, you are not dependent on any stratagems regularly. You need, like, an advance and charge once, and maybe some rerolls in places, it seems like to me. How do you feel like the CP gets managed in this list?
Well, you start with 0, and that's the correct number to start with. So what are you going to spend CP on? 4-up deny a lot, because I get a CP. It's because it can be great. So the only time this list is CP constrained, so throughout Harvester, I actually very frequently felt CP constrained and wish I had more. So there will be a turn where you're going to advance and charge the Terminators. So that's 1 CP. You're going to make Abaddon Red Corsairs. That's 1 CP. And you're going to want to re-roll a charge roll, right? So you want to have 3 CP to be ready. And then, like, if, for example, like against Chaos Knights in your Psychic phase, you fail a power you really need, now you're like in a spot where you really need 4 CP and you have 1 or 2. So like my experience is it's better to actually just not spend my CP at all, and then on the go turn, have plenty to do all the things I need to do. And the other thing I often use CP for that can make things tight is if I take Interrogation or Warp Ritual, I very frequently want to still cast a power. So he has a Marcus Inch, you can spend a CP to action and cast. And I find like that that also can eat all the CP I get.
Yeah, there's a lot of stratagem. Like, I mean, a lot of, obviously the power is in the list construction phase, because every CSM list I've ever seen has started with 0 CP. But it does seem like you have a fairly limited number of stratagems that you want to use. So as long as you just budget appropriately, it's usually okay. Can you talk a little bit about that stratagem for Abaddon that you were talking about, where you were turning him into a Red Corsair? How does that stratagem work? How much does it cost? And what are some other cool uses you've had for it over the course of the last couple weeks?
For sure. So it is a Black Legion stratagem, and Abaddon is in a Black Legion Supreme Command, so you can use it. It is 1 CP, and it lets a Black Legion unit get any other Legion trait. So I talked about him becoming Red Corsairs. Red Corsairs Legion trait is Advance and Charge, so it lets Abaddon advance and charge. I actually think the stratagem is one of the reasons doing an actual Black Legion army would be cool, because it gives you that real flexibility to do one really important thing. I think my favorite use, making him Red Corsairs do advance and charge is the most straightforward. Yeah, duh, everyone's gonna do that thing to do with him, right? I think my favorite use of that with Abaddon recently was in the finals at Harbor Heresy against Nick. So the Silent King and Abaddon are in combat with each other. He had charged Abaddon. And it's my turn. I'm like, what am I going to do here? I could stand here and I could beat on the Silent King. Or I could spend 1 CP to become Alpha Legion, fall back and charge onto an objective where some bikes are and clear the objective, which is way more worth my time than killing this dumb motherfucker. Anyways, so that felt great. I think using it, and it also lets you fall back in action of your Alpha Legion. So there are going to be some weird edge case ones. I like making him Bile as well. Because of the whole phase gate thing, it's really easy to know when Abaddon's going to die in the fight phase. So you can just make him Creations of Bile, and then your opponent gets a charge on him and kills him, and you get to punch back. So that's one of the really fun things in the list. And again, I'm thinking about playing some Black Legion, and one of the reasons I want to is because Black Legion actually has some cool tech toys I want to try.
Yeah, Black Legion is amazing stratagems. Plus synergies of actually being able to unlock all of the Legion locked abilities that can now work on Abaddon, like you were mentioning earlier, the heal from the mop.
I think that healing Abaddon
absolutely brutal.
Yeah, and I think you do it on a master position. You give the book to the Liber Hereticus, which gives him 6 more inches of range, so we can do it at 24 inches. That's
yeah, that is brutal. I've personally thought about Abaddon, not seriously, but just because leadership is hilarious. I love the thought of souping him in with Chaos Knights, because he can turn himself into a Night Lord for another -2 leadership. Just get down there in the pits with -6 leadership.
I was going to ask you actually if you would ever run Baby Knights and Abaddon. It's 11 Little Knights and Abaddon is the list, right?
Yep.
I think that's really interesting. I think that's really cool. I don't know if it's actually good, but I would think him is. I mean, he gives all your Little Knights reroll 1s too, right? So it makes your shit go brrr.
Yeah, it is very good. One of the big reasons I have not, and it's a bit of a not contentious. I don't know if the wording is or ruling is the right word, but the way I see it is you're not allowed to take Chaos Knight relics of Abaddon to your Warlord.
You could have a single relic, right?
The generic
relic strategy.
That is also a question of specific rulings, and that is not a popular ruling, though it is one that we've seen TOs use out here. I think that is. I mean,
it's very clearly rules as written though, right? Rules as written it very clearly. Yeah, it says give a relic to a character. The rule as written
is give a relic to a character that they could otherwise take. And in every single section where it says you get at a free relic, the contingency to take it is that your Warlord fits the criteria. So there is some debate about that. In my experience, the TOs in California say that's stupid. You definitely cannot do that. Some of the TOs up in the Northwest have said it is. Check with your TO, and if you can do it, you can. I should also mention, while we're talking about somewhat contentious rulings, I do know that in the Midwest and in parts of the East Coast, it's being ruled that Abaddon cannot use the Black Legion stratagem to Mighty Morph into a different sub-faction because he doesn't get the Black Legion chapter tactic in the first place. I don't think that's the correct ruling. I think rules is written, and it seems like he definitely can use that, but definitely check with your TOs on that as well, because it is a very powerful ability, as we've been discussing, and if you want to take advantage of it, you want to make sure that you don't get the rug pulled out under you when a TO rules mid-game that you can't do that. So
That one seems very clear to me because it does just need a Black Legion detachment, but check with your TO. They are the final authority.
So, in a slight digression, Lucas, if you are playing Chaos Knights and you can only have a single relic, is it the Helm of Dogs?
Yeah. Because that combination gets you your 11 dogs real ones to hit from Abby and real ones to wound from the dog hat, which is really nice. It also, having a phase-gated character allows you to counter enemy phase gate characters very well, which is usually a big struggle for Chaos Knights. Just being able to run in and like tag the enemy Abaddon or tag a Catan or something like that. Big deal. So yeah, I've thought about it. I'm just enjoying the Big Knight so much right now that I'm going to keep playing her.
I have a secret longing to play 11 Little Knights in Abaddon.
It's strong. It's very good. I feel like you need to go mixed melee shooting.
Yeah, for sure.
Part of the best part of Abaddon's like real ones to hit for core aura for all chaos is it also gives +1 to charge.
Right.
And Chaos Knights having unreliable charges, just no way to reroll, no way to get pluses really at all anywhere in the book that you want to take. That +1 to charge aura is pretty big for dogs.
Do you consider is everything House Herpatrix or whatever for the 2 extra wounds?
Yes. I've seen a lot of Abaddon plus like 11 Vextrix Knights, and I feel like that's...
They go through walls, right?
No, Vextrix just shoots. That's the only thing they do.
What do they get?
They get to supercharge one of their guns for +1 to wound, and then they get to reroll a hit and a wound whenever they shoot. So every dog is getting a lot of shooting efficiency because basically every dog is a melt-a-gun, but they all are double gun. They all do absolutely nothing in combat. Your only combat piece is Abaddon.
Yeah, that's not as exciting.
You have to backline. It's very boring. Herpatrax with Abaddon is really good. Just go for midfield control, put OPSEC 5 everywhere, have Abaddon slap some stuff up.
Do people run the melee at the carnivores at all?
I've got 2 in my list. Some people have 1, but most people have none. And
I mean, they move 14, right?
Yes.
So that's the appeal to me is you want 1 or 2 of them to move forward. There's like 5 bodies in OPSEC that moves 14 inches, charges on and makes a problem. That's literally their job.
You can also make one of your carnivores ignore invulns once per game.
Right, the corn thing.
Yep. People are not taking that. I have no idea why, but there we go.
I would actually, yeah. Anyway, so total digression, but I actually have a longing to do some Chaos Knights. I just if it were earlier in the life cycle, I probably would, but I'm worried like I would build it and it would just be irrelevant here in 20 minutes.
I mean, Votann are about to make that irrelevant, so there we go.
Yeah,
toughness skew is no more.
That seems like an interesting bit of a transition there. Obviously, everyone is kind of freaking out, saying that the sky is falling with regards to the leagues of Votann, and they present some of the same issues that Bile does with having such strong melee units that fight on death. But obviously, they bring a very different toolkit to the table. How are you feeling about how they're going to shake up the meta, and specifically how you may be able to deal with them either in tech choices or playment choices or whatnot with creations of Bile?
So I actually have played 2 games into Votann. Buddy and I did a couple just proxy ups, and I played demons into them, and I played CSM into them. I think we weren't playing the correct Votann things. We had some of the correct things, but certainly not all of them. And I think that Berserkers being 22 points and doing everything they do is silly. I think with the 5-up invo, so that if you take the 5-up invo sub-faction, your Berserkers just go from like gold to amazing, like insane. I think the judgment token mechanic working on everything, core, not core, vehicles, characters, everything, I think is just going to be problematic. It feels like it was a rule written like it feels like this concept came out from around like 8.5 Marines. That's what this book feels like to me. It feels like 8.5 Marines, like writing style and kind of rules, but now. And I think the 8.5 Marine Codex ruined the game. I think the game was in one of the best places it's ever been before that came out, and then it came out and the game was over. I think Votann are going to be the same way. I think that it's going to be largely because of the vehicles. The big tanks that ignore cover and have 1,000,000 dice and can be made to hit on 2s by the Tech Marine guy and can do the auto 6 to hit with the Rail Lance, so it just does like 12 mortals or whatever. Like, all that is silly, and it's going to break the game. I think what's interesting is Votann are going to be released. We're not going to have any of those models, and I don't know what different people are going to do. I don't know, like, the data will be totally mixed. If some TOs are allowing people to plop down a 3D printed land fortress that we have no idea how big it's actually supposed to be, if TOs let that happen, the data for Votann will be totally busted. And provided that never happens, Votann will not be very good because they'll have 3 models at release, and they'll be given no attention. And then someday a model will get released that breaks the entire game because it was the missing piece.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see how that rollout happens model-wise. For those of you all following along at home, if you're in the area, the next big GT that we've got is going on in Olympia. They are ruling no model, no data sheet, which is the same ruling that FLG is putting out for SoCal Open, that as far as I understand it. So if you're headed to some of those West Coast tournaments, that's kind of the norm. But at the end of the day, we're kind of only prolonging the inevitable, so
Right.
I would certainly be getting practice into them. It's interesting that you mention... I've heard a lot of takes about why Judgment is the worst mechanic in the game. I had yet to hear someone say that the problem is that it works on too many things. Locking that to core so it doesn't happen for the vehicles, and it's just, yeah, my squishy infantry can shoot really, really hard at the thing, I think that would be a very nice change to the army. I have heard a lot of people under the stat check, as we were saying this week, if you took Judgment out of the game, just remove the mechanic wholesale from the army, Votann would still be the best army in the game, head and shoulders. So I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that take. I think they very have a bit of a hyperbole in that, but I agree that there's some fundamental issues with the pointing of those data sheets. So I think with that sort of restriction and some points, Votann might actually be in an interesting spot.
I don't think they're unfixable. I just think that, like, as written now, they're, like, broken beyond belief. You asked specifically about how I think about Bile and Votann. So Votann actually exposed to me one of the, like, critical and fatal flaws of Bile. In having no real shooting, we are completely incapable of demeching like any sort of mechanized infantry. That could be mega knobs, and it would be mega problems. It could be Votann Berserkers, which are like free. It's 110 points for 5 of them, and come in little transports that are also like free, but for some reason also shoot really well. There's just no answer to that. Not in Bile, anyways.
Yeah, transports. There are not a lot of transports in the game right now.
No, mechanized infantry is not a thing, and Votann does that really well. I think we're going to see a lot of mechanized infantry Votann lists.
Yeah,
like their little transports are really good. If you wanted to, you could also make the little transports T8 by being the right sub-faction.
I think people are not talking about that list, but I think like you can only take 6 of them, unfortunately, right? Because they're not dedicated.
And I think 6 is the wrong number. I think you want 4. You want 4 and then a land fortress or 2, and one of your land fortresses has a full 10 in it, and that's
I would definitely be curious though to see someone taking 6 T8 buggies with 5 berserkers in each of them. That seems like a lot of fun.
Berserkers are also T6, which is, I mean, the 5-up inroll for the Zerks is obviously better than +1 toughness in like the vast majority of cases, but the +1 toughness is a nice defensive buff for them as well. Plus, you can cast the psychic power on them to make them T7, which is just fucking hilarious to me.
Yeah, your little dudes running around on 32s with no armor on are toughness.
I'm toughness 7. What?
Yeah, dude. Who thought it was okay to make +1 toughness a chapter tactic that applies to everything? Like,
that's not even the whole.
And it's not the good one. It's not the best one. It's not the second best one. It's maybe the third best one.
It's a third of the third best tactic.
Exactly. It's right. And that'll only that's good specifically if you want to make the little buggies tough, right? But it's not even like.
T9 trains is cute, but like, who cares? Yeah.
Right. It's insane though. It's insane that is broken beyond belief. If any other faction had that, it would just be taken all the time.
Yep.
How about Bile gets that? Why don't you just throw that in there with Bile?
+1 toughness.
Bile's chapter tactic is just another thing that makes me really annoyed with the GSC Codex, that it's like, man, so you're Twisted Helix +1 strength and movement. Very cool. and then instead of baby transhuman on your T3 dudes, your dudes are T5, and they army-wide fight on death. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's cute.
Can I have that trade? I genuinely think it would not be that good of a chapter tactic in GSC. It still wouldn't be that solid. Anyway,
turns out when you die to shooting, dying to melee is not so much of a consideration.
Exactly. So what are we thinking about? We got Votann coming up. We've also got a data slate coming up. And Zach, while you're on here, what do you think you'd like to see in that data slate? Let's just assume that it doesn't hit Votann because it's not gonna. What do you think? What do you think you'd like to see tweaked around here, bringing stuff up, bringing stuff down?
Well, I'm just going to put this out there that I would be really happy if Creations of Bile didn't get nuked from orbit, because if Creations of Bile get nerfed, the CSM codex is just done, which is sad. Maybe there's some EC in there, but it's whatever. What do I want to see? I want to see a buff to Space Marines, not Chaos Marines. I want normal, basic bitch Space Marines. I want Plasma Inceptors to go not just down to the 45 point. I want them to go down to 40 flat. Bolter Inceptors at 30. I don't care. Like, Marines are so irrelevant and have been irrelevant and getting no love. They need their points to come back down. They need things like they need the Volkite Contemptors to not cost CP in a Nephilim world. Those are things I would love to see. I would love to see some kind of buff to make intercessors or just marine bodies relevant to the game. That'd be my big ask. Also, demons. The points in the demons book are just bad. Things are way more points than the troops are bad and way too and they're bad and pointed expensive. Bring that down. Open that book up so you can do things that isn't just big guys and flamers.
I think the entire Nurgle quarter of the codex could come down 20%.
I think everything that's not a big guy, basically in the whole book, could come down 20%.
Or a flamer.
Flamers can count as big
Flamers
guys.
can go up 50% and still be
Flamers are a 30-point model at least.
No, I agree with most of those takes. Do you think that Necron's Unser Sister should get a little love tap?
Oh yeah, I think that. So I have long held a belief. There's this whole archetype of a secondary, right? That is the sisters action for 5 or 1, right? Thousand Suns action for 4 and can't do it at home at all. Some can do it for more on the home disease. Some can't. Some it's 4. Some it's 5. Does it complete this turn? All those things need to be standardized. Every single secondary that does that needs to be standardized and balanced. So the one that is done for 5 out there can't do 1 at home, and the one that so that all those things are considered and balanced. And that way you don't end up this one that's outrageously broken and the rest that no one ever takes. So I think that needs a love tap. I think Necron's one, the action one, just needs to be troops battlefield roll instead of fast attack. Or instead of OBSEC, I'm sorry. Which ends up being fast attack bikes is what I was getting at. I think that Necrons have stopped dominating once people figure out how to play into them, right? You have to apply full pressure and run them over. And if you just tone down Necron secondaries a little bit, I think the meta and players will do enough to even that out.
Seems about right. Looking toward the future, Zach. What are you heading toward next? Where can people look forward to seeing you make your next appearance?
Well, Slaanesh maybe. I'm just about to start the quarter like we were talking about earlier, and so I would like to make a GT2 in there, but school comes first, right? So it's gonna be what it is. But definitely I'll try and make Slaanesh. It actually may be the weekend before finals week, so I might not be able to do that either, but I'm hoping that's my next guaranteed.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week, Zach. This has been a really interesting delve into a faction that I hope to see a little bit more of. Honestly, I would love to see some more less experienced players playing it, so I could get some matchups into it that where I can see what happens when I don't have to also worry about playing someone of comparable skill level. But very, very cool stuff. If you enjoyed this episode and want to talk more or with Zach or the rest of the community, you can head on over to join us on Discord or via our Patreon. If you're looking to see more content, including, I believe there's some creation of Bile games that go on in the bit reps, because Chuck has been playing them as well. Head on over to our youtube.com/bestintabletop. Half our stuff is free, half our stuff is for members only. So if you want to get the full experience, become a member over there. There's even a bundle deal if you want to get the membership and the Patreon. If you're interested in seeing our faces on your shirts, they look like this. There's other ones. They're pretty cool. Head over to bestintabletop.com/store. Did I plug all the things, Lucas? Absolutely awesome. So check back again next week. We'll have Nick back on the show. We're gonna be, and probably some of the Aegis guys as well, covering Las Vegas teams. Very exciting event. I know that they're shooting specifically for best overall, so that's going to be one you're going to want to tune in live for, or just watch the YouTube to see some great pictures of some incredibly painted armies. And I think that's all the things. So once again, Zach, thank you for joining us. And with that all being said, I've been Tyler. Nick isn't here.
Yeah, bye, Nick.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Zach. It was a lot of fun.
We'll catch you all next week.
Adios.
Take care now.